Thank you. Hello, folks. Can you hear me in the back? Is it okay? Is that all good? Great. So, I prefer not to use a microphone. Thank you very much for inviting me to your home. In Remuera, I come from Sunnyvale in West Auckland. So when I come to Remuera, I actually have quite a warm feeling. First of all, is because my first serious girlfriend was here, and I thought I'd already made it in life, you know, when you have a girlfriend in Remuera, and my parents were very keen on her. The second reason is actually that my father trained in Remuera to be an Anglican priest. And the reason that he wasn't a priest, he became a teacher, was because he fell in love with my mum. And he went to the then vicar of the then, I don't know who it was, who would have been our senior up, but he went and asked for permission to marry my mother while he was still in training. And he was told, no, you have to finish your training first. So he chose love. 68 years later, they were married, and I just took my dad to Queenstown for the first time this weekend. I took him up to the snow, and he touched snow, and I said, and he was like a child. He's 89, and he was like a child. I said, well, when was the last time you touched snow? He said, 1962. So that was the second reason. The third reason why I feel warm in Remuera, I'll come to in my presentation. But I'll have a chat to you for about 30 to 35 minutes. I have some slides here as well, and lots of time for questions. And but I just wanted to have just a little chat first of all, as well, just a little chat about simplicity. Can I ask you, has any of you heard of us? Yeah, your hands up. Well, I just want to talk a little bit about us, just to give you the perspective that we have on the housing market, because we do things a little differently. And then talk about our housing crisis and how we can help. And I just want to warn you folks, and I'm going to take you to a dark place, right? I'm going to take you, but it is going to have a happier ending, okay? So we'll get through that, and then we'll go on to questions. So first of all, it's just about simplicity. Simplicity actually was the product of my midlife crisis. I come from Sunnyvale, West Auckland, and I made one amazing decision in life. I've already sort of talked about that. I chose my parents well. And they were both school teachers, and they just instilled in me just the values, a sense of values. But because I was from West Auckland, and I lived in a road, Seymour Road in Sunnyvale, where we had 104 houses, 100 of them were Māori and Pacifica, and there were 4 Pākehā families. And back in those days, this was, you know, the 1960s and 70s, I would call that the working poor. Everyone had a job, but as soon as one thing went wrong, they slid off the cliff. There just wasn't a lot of money around, a lot of extra money. But I was hungry for money, and so I went off and made my pile. And around about my mid-40s, I started looking in the mirror, and I didn't like the person that I saw. I was making myself wealthier and a few people around me, but I really wasn't giving back to the people of Sunnyvale, which my parents had done for their entire lives, and they still live out in Swanson, and they're still helping out people. And so I basically decided to cash it all in, and I went and planted trees on Motutapu Island for a year. I thought that's what I was going to do, be a tree planter. And after planting a lot of trees and with a very sore back, I decided no, I was a labourer, I wasn't adding any value here, so how could I actually do the best? I thought, look, why don't we just do what you know, but do it for good this time. So I had been in the finance industry, worked in London and New York and Hong Kong and so on, and I decided to give back by basically forming a non-profit. And effectively I got together with a group of 3 of us in a pub in Devonport. Has anyone been to the Patriot pub in Devonport? There we go. So in that pub, simplicity was born one night with a blank sheet of A4 paper. And what we basically said was, why are we doing this? And we said, why we have done simplicity is to give people dignity. So people have a dignified life, and particularly the dignity of a dignified retirement and the dignity of a roof over your head. And how do you do that? How does someone have dignity in life? They do that by having choices. If you have a life with choices, you have a life with dignity. You choose what you eat, you choose where you go on holiday, you choose. The other way of thinking about that is a life without choices. It's very hard to have dignity when you have to do things without choice. And so, what do you do to have choices in life? Money. Money buys you choices, and choices buys you dignity. Too much money may not be a particularly good thing, but having enough money is very important. The other way of putting this, and pardon me, this is the least colourful, it's going to be colourful language, but it's on taking down as much as I can. The other way of thinking about this is poverty really sucks. Poverty is horrible. And so we are basically, simplicity, as you'll see, we're a non-profit, but we are about making ordinary New Zealanders wealthier, to give them choices and dignity in life. And so how we decided to do that was we set ourselves up, Southern Cross Medical Society. Now, there are people who don't have pleasant claims experiences with Southern Cross. But Southern Cross generally is an organisation which is 75 years old, is a non-profit, has 75% market share, and fundamentally has actually done quite a lot of good for New Zealand. And so we said, well, why don't we just copy that? Let's become the Southern Cross of finance. So if you think about simplicity, just think of this as the Southern Cross of finance. And like Southern Cross, we're owned by a charity, 100% owned by a foundation, and that runs a non-profit company, and we started out doing KiwiSaver funds, now we do other investment funds, now we do low-cost first-home mortgages, we do other things in housing that I'll talk to you about. So it's a non-for-profit, it's founded to make members money and do good. We're a default KiwiSaver manager, and we give 15% of all of our fees up to the charity. Now the reason I wanted to describe this to you is because when you run a non-profit, it's really, has anyone actually run a non-profit business here? Yeah, this one. Hopefully you will agree with me on this. It's amazing how you think differently when you run a non-profit because we don't have shareholders, we don't make any money, we're a non-profit. Because we don't make any money, we're not worth any money. So our members might give us their savings and we earn it for them, but we're not worth any money. Because we're worth nothing, we'll never be bought or sold. So we will be around forever. So when people say, Sam, how long are you investing money for? I say, well, I'm investing it for the rest of my life, but simplicity is investing forever. We have a 100-year plus view of the world. In fact, we have a 100-year strategic plan for the business. We will never be bought or sold, so we'll be around forever. And that changes the way that you think about how you invest, because you don't worry about what the financial markets are doing this year or this month or this day. You think, how can you invest money so it will be a great investment for a very long period of time? It's a very different mindset. When I had previously been a fund manager all over the world for profit, and I was never thinking really more than 1 or 2 or 3 years out. Now we think 30, 40, 50, 100 years out. Very important. So we started out 7 years ago around my kitchen table. We now have, these numbers go up all the time, but it's now about 155,000 members. We manage about $6.4 billion. That's $6,300 million. That's a lot of money. And the 15% of fees, so far we've given $8 million to charity. And so we give away about $6,500 a day now to charities around New Zealand. And we save about $381 per member per year. That adds up to about $60 million a year in fee savings, which is once again making our members richer so they have more choices and dignity in life. So, a very fast-growing business, but really because we are a non-profit, because one of the interesting things about this is that because we don't have to make a profit, our fees are 1/3 of our competitors, sometimes 1/4 of our competitors. We charge much less. The finance industry is incredibly profitable, folks. Incredibly profitable. So I can talk about that later on. But we started having a look at, and by the way, these investments that we have, it's a lot of money. About 2/3 of it is overseas and 1/3 is in New Zealand. We'd like to invest more in New Zealand, and most of it we just buy and hold for a very long time. But every now and again we look at an issue and we say, can the fact that we have a 100-year view and billions of dollars to invest, can we actually make a difference and make money? We started having a look at our housing crisis. And really, I started looking for 2 reasons. One was my daughter came home from school one day, and I live in Takapuna. That's, in the Badlands across the bridge. Right. Oh, you're going to Takapuna, marvellous. So, my daughter came home, and she went to Takapuna Grammar. It's a really good school. And she came home, Dad, and she said, Dad, do you know that 2 of my teachers are living in a garage because they can't afford a house? I sort of thought, That's crazy because my parents have been teachers and we could afford a house, and I'll talk to you about that later. And then the second one was the week after I went to a charity event, our foundation, and I met a Pacifica family who had moved house 8 times in 9 years. And their children had moved 5 schools 5 times in 9 years. Anyone you had kids and grandkids? You know how traumatic it is moving to school for a kid, right? And that is because every house they moved into had been sold. In a rising property market, they move in, the house gets sold, and they have to move. And I thought, this is crazy. How can we solve this? Because it's not sort of the New Zealand, that I grew up in. And so I started looking at the numbers. And I thought that there were sort of 4 major problems. If you want to try and solve a problem, identify, try and work out what you're trying to fix first. So the first one is, and agree with me if you do, first of all, do you think we have high priced and hard to find homes? Quite a few nods there, yeah. Lack of long-term rental options, lots of nods there, yeah. High mortgage payments, are your kids paying too little on their mortgage? Okay. And lack of social and community housing, something we were just talking about here. So lots of nods there. So we identified those 4 problems and said, look, let's find out how bad the problem is, and let's see if we could do something about it. So this is a chart. I won't use too many charts, folks, but this is a really important one. This shows what percentage of the population, of the households, spend more than 40% of their income on the rent or mortgage. So how many households where you get $1 that comes in, you have to spend 40 cents on rent income? So, for example, in Germany here, this is all the OECD countries, all the rich countries in the world, supposedly rich. This is Germany, for example. So if you go look at Germany, go across here, you'll see that about 5% of German households spend more than 40% of their income, right? Whereas, and as it goes up, more and more households have to spend more on income. So where would you like to be? Would you like to be at this end of the chart or this end of the chart? You'd like to be this end, yeah. You'd like to have as few people as possible having to spend a fortune on housing. So, where is New Zealand? 25% of households in New Zealand spend more than 40% of their income on having a roof over their head, on rental mortgage. We are the most expensive housing market in the developed world. That is not a competition you want to win, right? That means we have a lot of people spending a fortune on putting a roof over their heads. And it gets worse. You know how I told you I'm taking you to a dark place, right? Where we're getting into that dark place. Here is the social housing register. This was December 2023. It's subsequently had another quarter where it's even higher. Basically, in 2000, we had about 5,000 households in New Zealand who went to the Department of Social Welfare and proved that they did not have enough money to pay the rent. This is not, you don't get on this register just by signing up. You have to show that you don't have the financial means, and so you get on this register. So in 2000, there was 5,000, and now there are there were 25,000, it's now 26,000 families, households in New Zealand who say we cannot afford to have a roof over heads. It doesn't matter whether it's 40, 50, 60%, we just can't afford it. That number, pretty much keeps on going up. That is not good. And if you look at how many houses we are short, here's some work done by Shamabeel Yacob. Have you heard of him, the economist? Yeah. So Shamabeel said, look, let's work out versus the OECD, how many houses do we have to build to get up to the OECD average? 166,000 houses. In fact, we'd have to build another 80,000 houses to be up with Australia in terms of number of houses per person. And if you look at Sweden, we'd have to build another 920,000 houses to have the same number of houses per capita as they do in Sweden. So we are chronically short of houses, and he actually added it up. This is the need for medium density homes. This is townhouses and apartments. He thinks we need another 91,000 in Auckland, another 28,000 in Wellington, and a whole bunch more. Interestingly enough, here in Canterbury, because of the post-earthquake rebuild, they don't need very many. But in Auckland and Wellington, and in Auckland particularly, a chronic shortage. So, let me just ask you a question. we get into this mess? Can I ask you some questions? Do we have a shortage of land in New Zealand? No, we're one of the least populated countries in the world. Do we have a shortage of building materials? No, quite a few trees out there, aren't there? Yeah, and concrete. Do we have a shortage of people to build houses? Sometimes it can be hard to get a plumber on a Sunday night. But as a general rule, we have builders in space. It's not like we're critically short of any work, but sometimes we are, sometimes short. Do we have a lack of money? Well, at today's house prices, yes, but there's plenty of money in New Zealand to do anything we want to. You know, we managed to rustle up $100 million for COVID, right? So if housing really was critical. So hold on. We have the land, we have the materials, we have the people to build it, and we have the money. So why are houses in New Zealand so expensive? Does anyone have any ideas? Sir?
The cost of land as a proportion of a total housing unit has gone from 20% to 56%.
Right.
That to me is the single major crisis.
The cost of land, yep.
It's huge.
This pursuit of the Kiwi dream, of the quarter-acre section or the other 400 square metre section with a standalone house. But yes, absolutely, price of land is one. Any other issue?
Taxation.
Taxation? What aspect of taxation?
Because, well, there are a number of elements, but one of them is that you can deduct the interest of a second mortgage, and the other one is that there's no taxation on the capital gain.
No taxation on capital gains. It's interesting, isn't it? Because if you think that if you were to provide a tax incentive like deductibility and capital gains, you'd think that more houses would get built though, wouldn't you? It's funny, isn't it? The tax system almost leads to a shortage of houses, but in theory it should lead to a lot more houses being built. But you're absolutely right. I think tax is one of the issues. Any other reasons why houses are so expensive? Yeah, it's all weird, isn't it? It's funny, isn't it? Because you think all the things. Well, do you mind if I just take you back in time a bit? I want to take you back to my mum and dad's experience. You remember I took my mum and dad. The source of all of this is Rosemary and Peter Stubbs, currently living in Swansea. This is the first house they bought in Auckland. This isn't the exact house, by the way. This is, but it looked exactly like this, and in fact their car was ironically exactly this as well. So, they built this, and my dad was a teacher. Remember how he left the clergy, became a teacher? He was a high school teacher, and his salary in 1960 was £1,700. Anyone remember getting salaries in pounds, shillings and pence? I was down in Queenstown, and I learned something the other day. I learned that a guinea was £1 and 1 shilling, right? Because it was written up on a school. They had a museum there, and they had a classroom. And that was my father's salary. And so they went and bought their first house. And it cost them £4,000. Anyone remember houses when they were £4,000? You know, can I ask you a question? When they were £4,000, did they seem expensive at the time? I bet they did, Houses have never been cheap. Houses are always expensive. That's £4,000. So that was, and this is one person's salary, by the way. It's not a household salary. This is one person's salary. Mum wasn't working then. They bought it for 2.35 times his salary. Does anyone remember what you did when you bought your first home? Who lent you money back then?
State advances.
State advances loan. Bang on, well done. So they got a cheap loan from the government. That's the way it used to be. Now, in the same suburb, in fact, on the same street, here is a house. It is the same size, 900 square feet. And now, this is from the Real Estate Institute of PBTA. Now the Megan's teacher's salary is about $95,000. That's actually quite a senior teacher. I'm being a little bit flattering here, but let's assume that my dad was a good senior teacher. That house now costs $975,000, right? Now, we're not going to compare the household income. We're talking about one teacher's salary because that's what it was bought on. Mum and dad bought theirs on one salary. So that is now 10.2 times the average salary. So to buy, and by the way, if you buy your first home now, do you get a cheap state advances loan? Oh no, you do not. You go to the banks. And which were the four most profitable companies in New Zealand last year? The four biggest banks. They're the only country in the world where that's the case, by the way, where the banks make so much money. So, the same house on a smaller section with the same income is now 4 times as expensive as it was when my mum and dad got married. That's the reality of the housing crisis. So, how do we get into this situation? And I asked you the question, I'm sorry, I'm going to try and answer it for you. Here's a chart which shows all of the building consents in New Zealand granted since 1920. And it's the number per 1,000 people, so it adjusts for our population rise, right? So back in the 1920s and 30s, we were building a lot of houses. We had the state housing boom. The first state houses were actually built by Julius Vogel down in Dunedin. That was the first state housing program. And we were by then building a lot. And then we had the 1930s, 1933, 34. What happened then? The Great Depression. We just ran out of money. No one was building any houses. And then we had the post-depression years, we started building a lot. And then in the 1940s, World War II, we were building guns and tanks. We weren't building houses. And then we had this glorious, but you know, we've been building quite a lot of houses. I mean, this glorious period of 30 years, building lots of houses. This is where Mum and Dad bought their first house, right here. We carried on building houses, and then suddenly, boom, we dropped, and we haven't been building houses for 30 years. Now, does anyone have a theory about what happened around here, which means suddenly we stopped building houses and just kept not building them as many? Anyone have a theory? Who was the Prime Minister around the late 70s? Robert Muldoon. Now, it wasn't his fault, but he was around. We had the oil crisis, right? We had Britain in the 1970s joining the European community, and they weren't buying our butter, and we had a massive economic crisis. And by the time Robert Muldoon left power, we were basically bankrupt. The World Bank gave us a loan, the only time in history that we've been bailed out by the World Bank. And what happened then was the government of the day came in and they said, we can't afford to build houses. We need to keep the hospitals open, the schools open, the roads functioning. And so the building of state housing basically fell off a cliff. We stopped building state houses. And they wound up the state advances scheme and so on. The private market kept on building houses. This line here is pretty much what private, mums and dads who were building rental houses, they kept on doing it, building their own homes. But the government forgot to build houses. Now, why didn't they start again? Well, here's my theory. Shamu Yapam and I, and quite a few other economists agree with this, but it's not, no one will admit to this. Back here, 82% of New Zealanders own their own home. Most people own their own home. And are there any homeowners in the room here? Okay. Can I ask you, do you like your house prices going up or down? So if you're 82% of people and you're not building enough houses, so the supply is constrained, but the demand continues, right? Anyone here done, economics? What happens when you have less supply and the same demand? The price goes up. Right? Now, if 82% of people here start to see their price go up, do you start feel pretty good? Yeah? New Zealanders are obsessed with the price of their house, right? The price of the house goes up and people feel okay. And the subsequent finance ministers, this is not a Labour or national thing, subsequent governments come in and they say, look, the papers want us to build more schools and more hospitals, that's what we really need. Okay, we'll just postpone the state housing system, right? And we'll just postpone it, because house prices keep on rising and people are feeling good. And then the governments come in and they say, we'll give you a revolving credit mortgage. You can stick the holiday on the house. Right, we'll lend you more money. In fact, we'll lend you money to build another house because they're going up. We won't necessarily lend you money to start a business, but it's very easy to borrow money to buy a house, right? But the whole tax incentives thing as well. So, house prices keep on going up. And folks, the dirty little secret, the Faustian pact that we all signed up to without consciously thinking about it, is we like house prices going up if we owned it. We wanted them to go up. And so we were never asking our politicians, never saying to them, the most important thing is you get state housing building again, or you get my houses built. And so prices went up. Now we're right here, and now, whereas here 82% of New Zealanders own their own house, now only 62% agree. So 38% of people feel like they've been shut out of the New Zealand dream. And so now rising house prices are much more politically sensitive. Do you see the Prime Minister saying the one thing we want is for house prices to rise? No, because they know that 38% of voters are not happy about that at all. Because house prices going up means rents go up. And rents go up means I'm just, more of my money. So we looked at this and we said, look, fundamentally, the housing crisis, you were absolutely right about name price. There's a whole lot of reasons why. But fundamentally, the problem is we're not building enough houses. And if you add on to the fact that we also have divorces, so the house sizes, family sizes is smaller, people are living longer, so we need the houses for longer, more people living by themselves, it just exacerbates that problem and it makes it worse. So the only way to solve the housing problem long term is to build more houses. So this is what we started doing. We started to decide to start building long-term rental homes to increase the supply. We started providing low-cost first home mortgages so that the houses that we do have are more affordable for first home buyers to get more people owning their house down the ladder. And we started funding community housing this is the instrument we do. And we started with KiwiSaver investment funds. And so this is what we've started doing. I'll start you with a lovely story. You know Stephen Tyndall?
Yeah.
Stephen Tyndall is the patron of our charity. He's sort of the godfather of simplicity, really. And I was in with Stephen one time. He's a lovely friend. And I said, Stephen, I really want to start taking on this house supply issue because it's all this KiwiSaver money coming along now. It's $110 billion we've saved, and it will soon be hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. So how do we do this? He said, I want you to meet Shane and Anna Brearley. So I met Shane, so then I had to cancel the meeting, and I think he was running out of patience with me. And finally, the last time, he said, I'll meet you. And he said, come to a building site. And I don't know, you know when you meet someone and you have, ladies, this is a male term, but you know when you have a bromance instantly? Just an instant romance with myself and Shane. Because basically, to cut a long story short, here's what Shane and Anna, this is their story. They are from similar working class roots, and they had made a fortune in property development. They had actually been the biggest builder of Kiwi built houses for Kailua, and Shane has built Metropolis, large parts of Britomart on behalf of the big Australian building companies, and they wanted to give back. Because what was happening is they were building Kiwi built houses, and they were being sold by lottery to the lucky couples who would get their first home Kiwi build. And then after 2 or 3 years, they would start seeing Audis and BMWs parked outside, because what was happening was these were actually rich kids who were putting their name into the lottery, getting a cheap house, and then selling it for a profit. So it wasn't working for them. So they said to us, look, we want to build a lot of homes that will really benefit ordinary New Zealanders. And so basically, their building capacity with Simplicity's money was a match made in heaven. And what Shane and Anna did was give us their company. Now, this is a very significant construction company, and they gave it to us for nothing, and they promised to run it for 10 years, pro bono. We haven't paid them a cent. And so we started, and that's what Simplicity Living is, I think, and they're always embarrassed. They're not in the room, so I'll say it. But I think it's one of the greatest acts of corporate philanthropy in New Zealand from two people who just don't want to be known for it. So basically what we've done now is we started getting to build the rent home. So Simplicity Living in 2 years has spent $136 million. We've already we've now built 210 because we just opened this last development at Rangi Road in Mount Albert just last week. So we now have 210 homes built and rented. We have another 297 in build right now that we're building, and land for another about 600. So we've got about 1,100 homes in development or construction. We're building them for 100 years to rent long term. So one of the happiest days of my life was we had an 82 and 83-year-old couple, and they moved into one of our apartments, and we said, I got to say the most amazing 2 words. You said to them, "You're safe. You can be here forever. You never have to move again." And we signed a rental lease for them, where the rent only goes up with national super, so it's inflation linked. So it is as affordable in 10 years' time as it is now, and it provides a really fair return for our members as well. So our members, they get returns via rents, the capital appreciation of the building, and also the development profits. And I'll talk about that because we're building at 35% below normal market costs. We're actually building extremely efficiently to provide people with warm, dry homes, and it's a good business and a good investment for our members. To give you an example of what we've built in the Auckland Isthmus area. We have 6 different sites now. 3 have been built and 3 are under construction, and our intention is to build a lot more. I'll show you that in a minute. We build in basically the middle of Auckland. We will go on to the North Shore shortly, because actually, I talked about that 100-year view. Well, here's an interesting fact. In 2080, New Zealand's population has a 100% chance of shrinking. By 2045, there's a 25% chance that our population starts shrinking. And if you look at cities like Seoul and Tokyo, the 2 cities in the world that are shrinking, people retreat towards the centre. So one of the conversations I have with young couples is, you may want to buy a place in Drury because it's affordable, but don't hold it for too long. Because if the population does start shrinking, or thinking about it, what's happened in Tokyo and Seoul is those outer suburbs have ended up being sort of deserts. And the rates are very large because they've got to keep the water pipes and the power lines still going with fewer and fewer people. The schools start emptying out. So we like to build in the centre, and we also like to build up. The other reason is, ecologically, this is easily the best decision. Because instead of putting down new roads, new sewer pipes, new plants, we are basically building where people already live. And there are already all of those facilities. And they're all basically on major transport corridors as well, bus lines and rail lines. Here are some examples. This is one we just finished in Mount Albert, 51 homes. To give you an example, these are built of concrete and brick. They don't have any painted surfaces on the outside. They're built to last 100 years. They actually, we think our rated life's about 150 years, but we know of similar buildings in Birmingham. If you've been to Birmingham or Berlin or London, you would have seen brick last a long time, right? It's actually a miracle building material in a way. So we finished that. This is one that we're building in Mount Wellington right now. This is 297 homes. I'll take you through. And interestingly enough, the Ellerslie Racecourse, when you go past the southern motorway and you see those 4 Norfolk pines? Well, we bought that, and we're going to build 329 homes there. And this is very interesting. I'll give you an example of our dream here. Actually, just let me tell you a little bit about these. These are actually, they're brick buildings. There's only really 4 materials in them: concrete, brick, glass, and aluminium. And there's a bit of steel on the roof there as well. But we don't like putting material into our buildings that hasn't been tested for at least 100 years. In the case of brick, 3,000 years of testing. Because we're going to own them for 100 years. And because you're going to own them for that long, you actually spend more money on them. So our apartments are 15% bigger. In fact, the new ones here will be 23% bigger than normal. And we do things like, when we put the lifts in, we put 2 really big, expensive lifts in. A, because we've got to maintain them. B, because you've got to get wheelchairs in, right? They're 85% life mark, so we hopefully a lot of retirees will live here with a view. But B, also, over 100 years in those lifts, you've got to get a lot of double mattresses up and down, right? So you need to have big lifts. And so you spend a little bit more on making them last a lot longer. But here's a lovely story. This building here is right next to the Mercy Ascot Hospital. And we got approached by the Mercy Ascot Hospital. They said, could you come and have a chat? And they said, look, we have nurses' aides and hospital workers who are commuting 2 hours down the motorway to Drury because it's the only place they can afford to rent. Would you mind renting to our staff in this building so that their commute goes from 2 hours to 2 minutes? Hallelujah. That's exactly what we want to do. And the thing, folks, I've got to admit to being a little cheeky here, Lewison, because the other thing is the really 3 things I love about Renew Era, the girlfriend and my dad. The third one is that I just love the idea of those people having a Remuera postal address. There's something about the Sunnyvale boy. So these are the sort of things that we're doing. Now, there's a minimum of 50 homes, a maximum of up to 300, mostly apartments, and I think over time we'll get into things like townhouses and so on. They're not standalone houses. They are properly built with timber and steel, and that's a good construction methodology, but here it's much more efficient. And I'll show you why. Well, actually, just show you one more thing. Here's a typical floor plan of a 2-bedroom apartment. This would be, now in the modern ones, this will be about 78 square metres, so large, with a 6-metre balcony. So, this is an apartment. Have any of you lived in apartments before? Yeah. Oh, great. So let me ask you some questions. Who likes storage? If you are living in this apartment, if you were building this to sell, you might do some different things. There are a whole range of apartments, some beautifully made. But if you were built to sell this and maximise, you would skimp on storage. But here's huge cupboards here, 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 and here. Lots and lots of storage. Who likes a small shower? If I was to build this to code, I only have to put in a 750mm white shower. That's the code. This shower here is 900mm. It's just nicer to be in. And if you were going to go and buy an apartment, you wouldn't go into the shower and close the door and move your arms around. So you don't have to do that if you sell it. But if you're going to live in it and want people to be happy living in it, you'll have a nice shower there. If I was to build this to sell quickly, I'd put in what they call a strip kitchen. It looks nice, it photographs well, you don't really notice it. But, has anyone here cooked a lot of meals in their lives? Yeah? So would you prefer a single strip kitchen, or would you like an L shape or a galley kitchen? Yeah, so all of our kitchens are galley shaped or L shaped. They're just better to cook in, there's more bench space and so on. This here is 6 square metres, I'll show you a picture of it in a second. Who likes to have, those little balconies you have, like on cruise ships with just two chairs, and you can't really, So this is one where you can sit down, put a barbecue and have a proper, so you can, because we want people to live here, if they want to, for the rest of their lives happily. So here's a picture of that apartment. There's the deck there. You can see a couple of big chairs, you can get a barbecue on and so on. And here's a picture of the inside, and I just wanted to show you a few things. When you build, you remember how I talked about that 100-year view? We want to own these apartments for 100 years and rent them. So you do things a little bit differently. First of all is, you build the ceiling higher. That's a 2.7 stone. Regulation is 2.4, we've got 2.7. Why do you do that? It just feels nicer. It feels bigger, it's more gracious. On the floor here, we could put carpet, but we put with this thing called luxury vinyl. It's a horrible name, isn't it? But what luxury vinyl is, it's twice as expensive as carpet. It looks like timber. Did you think that was wood? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like wood. You can't tell the difference, but it's warm under feet. And also you can spill red wine on it. The dogs can scratch it, the cats can scratch it, because you can have animals, no problem. And it just lasts. It's absolutely bulletproof and looks nice, and is nice and warm and soft to the touch. The other thing is, just to notice here, is that these windows, and if you see in our these pictures here, you're ordering huge amounts of the same ones. And that means that the apprentices know how to put them in. I can talk about construction, but basically we're now building these for 35% below the market rate, so they're much cheaper. They're built, we spend more money than we would have to, because we build them to last. We build them last 150 years. And this one here in Mount Albert, we built 51 homes in 12 months. From the first time we stepped on the site to the time we opened it for renting was 12 months. So you can build them very fast. And the reason is we build these on what we call on-site manufacturing. We actually run this like a production system. We just happen to make houses, but we run it like a factory. And I can go into that in more detail later on. Here's our long-term goal. We want to build up to 10,000 homes and have them rented out long-term. And we think it'll make really good returns for our members because of the capital appreciation, but the development profits, and then also the rental income. And here's where we want to build them all over the country, where we think the need is. And in Auckland, about half of them will be here to satisfy that. I actually think it may well end up being more than half, because there is more than half of the need for houses in New Zealand. But anyway, that's it. You'll see that we have a minimum of 100, because we want to always have a property manager on site or very close, because we own these, and we're calling them Simplicity Villages, so that we've got our brand name on them, and we want the tenant experience to be great. So, the second thing we decided was, how do we get people into their first homes? So we started doing first home loans. And in the first few years, we've lent 155 million. We've actually got about 400 couples into their first home, but about 89 of them have actually repaid the loan early, which is lovely, right? So they own their home faster. We lend out our members' money. It's an average of a 65% loan to value, so we lend on an average 65% of the value of the property. We haven't had a single default in 3 years, and we're currently charging a rate of 6.4%. We're typically about 1% below what the lowest rate in the market is. We remove the middleman, the bank, so investors and borrowers can, and we've lent all over the country. Now I'll show you how this operates, because I think you're going to work this out real quick. Can I show you how the banking system operates? I'm going to use 5 little books here. These are the last 5 I've got actually. This is Money Made Simple. Someone asked me to write a book that you could read in an hour, which would be the home truths of money. And actually this is an interesting place to say this. The publisher just told me that this is New Zealand's best non-selling book, except for the Bible. 140,000 copies. These are the last 5, but we're getting another print run done. And interesting enough, this time, on the other side, it's all in Te Reo as well. So you can do it. So, but I'm going to use this, and I'm going to pretend that this represents 1%. I'll leave these for you to take, and they're all available online for free. So, who wants to be a bank depositor? Okay, you'll be a bank depositor, and who would like to buy their first house? There we go, the 2 of you. Okay, and I'm going to be the bank. Okay, now I'm going to show you how banking operates, folks. I've done this for 40 years. Running a bank is as simple as this, and this is why mortgages are so expensive and they make so much money. So you have a deposit, and let's say I'm paying you. We'll work in a world where deposits were earning 3% and bank loans were 5%, right? But right now, you could, if deposits were 6%, bank loans are rate, they make about 2%. So here's how I bank. I'm the banker. Now, the great thing is that you two don't know each other, right? So, because you can't lend to each other, you have to go through me. So I take your deposit. I'm paying you 3%. You give me the money, and I'm going to give you 3% in a minute, and I add on 2%, and I give you the loan, right? Well, just think about it the other way. You're paying your mortgage at 5%. I pay you, the depositor, 3%. Yeah? That's banking, folks. It's not any more fancy. I know there's fancy ends and branches, but that's what we do, right? Now, this 2%, do you know, this is called the net interest margin. This is the number no banker wants you to know about, but they have to publish it. In New Zealand, it's about 2%. Do you know what that means? That 2% means on all the loans in New Zealand? Do you know what that means in terms of profit? $10 billion a year, $300 a second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including Christmas Day. They're making money, right? So that is how banks make money. They just pay you 3 and charge you 5. Now, let's see how Simplicity does it. Would you mind being a Simplicity KiwiSaver investor? And would you mind being a Simplicity first home borrower? So remember how I charged you 5% as a banker? Now I'm Sam from Simplicity, not making any money. So I'm going to charge you 4%, 1% lower. So that. And of course you're the Simplicity member, and I'm going to pay you all of it. Our mortgage business only has 3 people and 3 computers. That's it, right? So remember how you were getting 3%, now you're getting 4%, right? You're making 1% more, and you're paying 1% less, right? So what we've done is we've taken that 2%, and I've given you 1 in terms of a lower interest rate, and you 1 in terms of higher. Does that seem make sense here? Okay. So, can I ask you, is that a new idea? What organisations used to take members' money and then lend it to members? Building societies. Thrift societies. Yeah? Remember the Knights Templar? Yeah. We used to think about them in the Crusades. They were actually linked to each other. Think about the Masons. All of these non-profit societies have been doing this for centuries. We're just doing it with KiwiSaver. It's exactly the same thing. And to prove it, here is home loan rates since we started doing this in 2019. We've been doing it for about 5 years now, just quietly getting used to it, proving it up. Here's our floating rate. Here's the average bank's 1 year rate, and here's the average bank's floating rate. So we've been pretty consistently we've always been cheaper, but sometimes a little bit less. But now the rates are sort of back to normal, about 1% less, and way lower. And remember, this is a floating rate. The bank's floating rate, we've been 2% cheaper. So let me ask you a question. Why does a bank charge 2% more than for a floating rate than Simplicity?
Profit for shareholders.
Profit for shareholders. But why do they charge more for their floating rate than their 1 year rate? I'm going to tell you a dirty little secret. Because they don't want you to have a floating rate. They don't want you to pay off your mortgage earlier. They want you to take a fixed rate so they can charge you a penalty. And also, they want to have a conversation with you at least every year about fixing your rate so they can send you a credit card. It is no more expensive for a bank to lend on a floating rate than a 1 year rate. A tiny bit more expensive. Almost imperceptible. So that's why they do it. So this is what we've been doing. This has been lending to first home buyers cheaper and also making our money, our members, more than they would get than if we had put it in the bank. So that's how you can do a win-win. So we started doing that, and this is what we want to do. We want to do 10,000 of these around the country. And if we do it in the same proportion as we've done it so far, in Auckland here, for example, we'll get about 2,850 families into their first home cheaper. Because at 1%, let me give you, see what this means in the real world. The average loan in New Zealand for a first home is $500,000. What is 1% of $500,000? $5,000. $5,000 is about $100 a week, right? That means we are charging $100 less a week in interest. $100 a week is a lot of money. If you're buying your first home, that buys a lot of food. And remember how we said about with money you get choices in life and you get dignity? You just have more options in life when you're paying a lower mortgage rate. And the third thing we said was let's get community housing built because we have a crisis. And so what we started doing is working with an organisation called Community Finance. And basically what we've done the first 2 years is we've invested $36 million, which has allowed 165 homes to be built, 130 in Auckland and Waikato 31. And basically what we do is we provide the first mortgage finance that allows those houses to be built. And because they are built, that means obviously the community housing providers, some of whom are churches, can actually get the financing line to build it. And what we want to do is expand this all over the country because actually the interest rate we get at 1% over what we get in the bank, about 6.5%, is actually a perfectly fair return. And because community housing providers know where the demand is, and because actually the government subsidises a lot of the rent and mortgages, it's a very safe investment. So we started doing this. The banks don't like doing this because it's a bit different. They don't like different. If it's a community housing provider, it's suspicious, and what do you mean government supported? What we say is, look, this is crazy. These are community housing providers that are putting roofs over people's heads. Do you think those houses are going to be empty? Do you think no one's going to be paying rent? Or you're just crazy. There's huge demand for this. So we lend on this. We've never had a missed payment, but we've only been doing it a few years. So this will get above benchmark returns for our members and help increase the housing supply. And what we want to do here, we want to do this with up to 5,000 houses all around the country. And if we look at that social housing register, we see that there is demand all over the country. I was just in a Hawke's Bay. Does anyone think Napier is a poor place? There's a tent village in Napier now. People who just don't have, and you will be very familiar with these stories. So what we want to try and do is take the funding from KiwiSaver, which is a tiny trickle at the moment, and turn it into a stream, constant stream of funding, which allows community housing providers to build the houses they want for their communities. So, we've made a good start, but it's only a start, right? And in the first few years we built, actually it's 210 homes now, got another 1,000 in development, some first home mortgages and some community houses, so 1,575 homes in 3 years. We want that to be 25,000 homes. Now, folks, I'm going to give you a really sobering statistic. Do you know how many homes we have to build in New Zealand a year just to replace the ones that fall down, burn down, or get knocked down? Anyone want to guess? Just to stand still. 20,000 homes a year. That's before we increase the housing stock. So simplicity will do some, but we can't fix the problem. But what we have decided to do is, particularly in this area, the building of houses, we decided to give away all of our intellectual property. So we've given it away to 70 organisations. We want to show them how to build houses faster and cheaper and to a higher quality. So far, 2 of them are now becoming copycats, and it's fantastic. We want them, they're building houses to sell. We're building houses to rent, they're building houses to sell. And we've actually set up what we call a productivity hub, which is in our latest development in Mount Wellington. We've actually built a suite which will show people how these houses are built, how much faster they can be built, the economics of it, and so on. And so we're just going to take the whole industry through and try and show them that you really can build faster, cheaper and better. So you will, if you're a Simplicity member, you'll be receiving an invitation to that. It will be open every day from 10 o'clock, and we will show you around, and there'll be it's right on a building site. You'll see 300 homes appear before your very eyes. And we started building them now, and they'll be ready in about 19 months. We'll start renting them, and it'll all be finished. So that's what we started doing. I will pause there, I think. There's a whole lot more I could talk about, but I won't. I'd just like to answer your questions. What would you like to know? Sir?
The things that are going through my mind is the state of capitalism at present. It's in crisis. You've got this cyber finance moving in, and you've got the fact you've pointed out the magic of the money trick. But there's an excellent program you can Google. It's simply called the Money Masters, and it takes you back in time 2,500 years, and it brings you right up to the present.
Okay.
And it shows you very clearly what a con the banking system is. But coupled with that, you've got health and education as well. So what we're looking at really is a global problem.
Yep.
And the big problem is, with this money that's being created out of cheap labour in different countries like India, China, even possibly Russia. But you've got that money that's floating around the planet now because their methods of construction have caught up with the rest of the planet. And consequently, you've got these oligarchs or people in that bracket that have got all this money, and they're looking for what they're going to do with it. So they're looking around the planet. New Zealand's made it very easy for them to join the local capitalists with the landlords, and where it'll only end when the system itself ends and we start producing for each other. You look at the misdirected labour that goes into the arms industry. It's crazy.
Yes, so that's, we could sit down and have quite a few dinners talking about this, but I totally hear what you say. I'm reminded of Shakespeare. You know what Shakespeare said? Well, he actually said kill all the lawyers, but I think he meant the bankers as well. But yeah, you're right. So I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Have you heard of Warren Buffett? When he's the most famous investor, here's a lovely line. He said, "Look, you know, this is a massive problem. The best time to have fixed this problem was 30 years ago. The second best time is now." And so we're just getting on with it. You know, we're not going to give up. And I agree with you a lot about you know, the capitalist system has some very unfortunate And it goes through a cycle, in my opinion. I don't know if you remember that song in New Zealand, the rich get richer, the poor get picture. The rich get richer, the poor get the picture. Well, then the poor get the pitchforks. What I mean by that is that as soon as you have an inequality, history tells you that as soon as there is an inequality in wealth, there is revolution. The seeds of revolution are sown in inequity. So in order for our kids and grandkids to have the lives that we want them to have, we've got to do something about it. Now, I'm actually very optimistic. I think the next 30 years are going to be about the best who have ever lived in New Zealand for a couple of reasons, well, a lot of reasons, but for example, if you're a woman, I think it is an awful lot better to be young now than it was. You have so many more opportunities and chances. But the reason I say that is because if you go back to, if you look at what KiwiSaver is doing, we've started saving in KiwiSaver. We've now saved $110 billion, and that's going to rise and rise and rise. And the Treasury tells us that by 2050, that will be $900 billion. Now, one of the reasons why New Zealand is so poor is because let's look at Australia. Australia has 5 times our population. How much more retirement savings do you think they have? 35 times. They have saved a whole lot more money than we are, which is why they are actually a whole lot richer than we are. So, but however, we have started saving now. And the great thing about that is it's what I call a rising tide of capital. A little bit more comes in every day. And that means that we will, because if you think about it this way, every dollar that we save in KiwiSaver is a dollar that wouldn't have been on the mortgage. Because we just used to pay off the mortgage, right? That's how a whole generation of New Zealanders got richer. Pay off the mortgage, get a rental property, pay off that mortgage, get a rental property, pay off that mortgage. It's fantastic in terms of wealth creation for you, but it's a terrible asset productively. I mean, it's not like investing in a business or a factory or something that actually generates profits and so on and so forth. But with KiwiSaver now, we are slowly diverting some of that money from mortgage payments into what I call the productive economy. And the reason I'm so optimistic is, you can say you're dreaming, Sam, but look at Australia. Back in 1985, they started saving in compulsory savings. And Australia is a commodity country. Australia has oil and iron ore, and everyone says, oh, Australia's rich because they sell all the coal to China. No. New Zealand's we've got milk. And in fact, if you look at the mineral profile of Australia, it's very much like the Republic of Congo, actually. Now, where would you rather live, right? How has the Republic of Congo been a bust economy forever, and yet Australia's been a thriving economy? It's not because they've had minerals, because they've actually saved the money and they've reinvested it. To give you a proof of that, even though the price of iron ore and coal has gone up and down over the last 30 years, guess how many years Australia has been recession-free? 28 years. They had 28 years. Just last year they dipped into recession, now they've come out again. They had 28 years, no matter what the price of iron ore or coal did, they just kept on growing. And that is going to start happening in New Zealand. And I'll give you something to look for. You start to notice, in fact, funny enough, Nicola Willis just said it yesterday, or today I think, that things are going to start getting a little bit better. You're going to start to see things are slightly better than people forecast, slightly better. And all those lots of little things is because KiwiSaver is getting reinvested in the economy. Just like it happened in Australia and Singapore and England and America and Denmark and Sweden and Germany and France and every country which is richer than us, is because they all have a lot more money saved in their pension schemes, and that gets reinvested into the economy. And the reason I don't predict financial markets. By the way, can someone tell me where the stock market will be in a year? Because I have no idea. I don't bother predicting financial markets. I just spread your investments very, very quickly. The one thing I do know is this, is that if you see what happens at Simplicity, in 7 years we've been growing. Guess how many days we've had to sell something in order to pay people's money back?
None.
0. Not one. Because every single day, New Zealanders say, 155,000 New Zealanders save a little bit. Every day now, we're getting between $4 and $5 million a day to invest. Every day. Just comes in. So I can see what happens. And we invested. We invested in all those things I talked about. But all of that I talked about, that's only 7% of what we invest. The other 93% is everything else we do. All around New Zealand, stock markets, share markets, bond markets. But every single day we get a little bit more money. And it's like a rising tide. Have you ever seen a tide rise? You stand there and look at it, so I'm going to watch the tide rise. Nothing's happening, but it is. And you turn away, and you come, oh, the tide's gone up. That's what's going to happen with the New Zealand economy over the next 30 years. We're going to slowly rise. And it's going to be a great time to be a kid or a young adult, because what happens with that money, well, let me put it this way. You can't get high nurses' salaries unless you have higher taxes. You can't have higher taxes unless you have more productivity. You can't have more productivity unless you have more investment, and you can't have more investment unless you have more savings. We are now saving. We used to save in just building houses. Now we're saving and putting into other things. So savings means investment, investment means productivity, productivity means taxes, and taxes mean better salaries and better jobs. And if you want to see the best example of that all around the world, just go 3 hours to the left. Go to Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane and find out how much their nurses get paid. And go and ask their economists why. It's KiwiSaver. It will be, literally, pardon the pun, KiwiSaver will be the saviour of our economy. And I can see it happening. I'm at the coalface, I see it happening every day now. It's really good. Which means we can start building houses. That was a very long answer to the question. Sorry. What else have you got?
So we haven't talked at all about the New Zealand Super Fund.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge amount of money, $60 billion, and they can invest it any way they want to. Sometimes in New Zealand, sometimes not. And look, I agree with a lot of what they do and disagree with some of it. I think they should be doing a lot more in this, but they always say they are doing some things in this area. They can point to some very large greenfields developments they're doing. I disagree with that. I do not think that Auckland should be expanding out into Drury. I'll tell you why I think that is because every one of those houses charges the development surcharge. The council charges $80,000 approximately to the developer to put in the roads and the sewers and the power and so on. But it actually costs the council $200,000. So we are actually subsidising the build. Current ratepayers are subsidising the building of new houses in Drury. Why would you do that when we can build more houses in the middle of Auckland and just build up and use the same sewers, the same roads, the same blocks? Because we get charged a development surcharge of $17,000 per apartment, and that more than pays for all the work the council have to do. Seems pretty simple to me.
Yep.
But and the answer is, yeah, a big pool of money could do amazing things, but sort of agree and sort of disagree with what we're doing here. Did you have a... Sarah, I'll come back to you just a second.
It was just, is that differential in the Drury example, is that to do with the cost of putting things in, or is it the lack of funds for maintenance?
It's actually the cost of putting things in.
And then that would charge maintenance.
Well, they'll charge, in theory, once they put it in, your rates will pay for the maintenance. So in theory, that sorts itself out a little bit more. But look, I have politicians, actually have Mayor Brown, by one of our developments, and say, Mayor, it is, right now, this piece of land had 3 ratepayers on it. Now it has 51. Right, go figure. That's just much more efficient utilisation of our resources. And by the way, has anyone lived in a big city? We're all fearful about living in these apartments and townhouses, but it's actually 4% of New Zealanders live in apartments, and the OECD, the average is 42% of people live in apartments, right? So we just got to get used to it because it's more affordable, but also, quite frankly, it's more social. And it's how most people live. And Auckland is becoming a big city. It is no longer a small or medium-sized city, so it has to start acting like a big city, and people like it. And by the way, build it next to a train station, you don't need a car. Yeah.
What do you make of the English report into Kainga Roa?
Are there any reporters on the room?
We're capturing it all on film, though.
I'll be very honest with you. I think Kainga was full of incredibly well-meaning and competent people, but they were unfortunately led as an organisation, and they were allowed to expand beyond their comfortable ability to deliver. They just got a little bit headstrong about what they could do, and that means they didn't deliver enough houses. We tried to work very hard with Kainga. We started out working with them, And we eventually effectively fired them. We said, well, we can't work with you anymore. And the reason was, and I'll give you just the final line. They said, look, I'll tell you why we're doing this. The final meeting in which we said we need to have a discussion as we come to firing you, there were 2 of us and there were 16 of you. Oh. That pretty much sums it up. Right? Too much hooey, not enough doing.
Yeah.
So, but they were very well-meaning people and very nice people, and their hearts were in the right place. They were just not in an organisation that allowed them to deliver and perform. They, as an organisation, they ended up liking talking about building houses more than actually doing it, unfortunately. So that's going to change. I have no idea what the final outcome will look like, but certainly that could not continue.
I just found it very perplexing that we were told all the time that there was huge debts at the same time as we were building assets.
Yes. Well, they borrowed $28 billion or something like that, in theory, to buy, and they bought a lot of land. I mean, the price they paid for land was a bit of a standing joke amongst the development community. They would go in and pay huge prices for pieces of land that we couldn't possibly make work. Look, I guess they still have that land now. I think Simplicity Living will probably end up buying some of it. Yeah, but I can promise you it'll be a lower price than they paid for it.
So there are other organisations building to rent, like building apartment blocks and then the idea of renting them out.
Just a couple, sir. Yeah, Kiwi
and why not more?
Kiwi Income and Newground, 2 of the others who are doing it in some scale. It's hard. It's hard because it's so expensive to build in New Zealand. We couldn't make the economics work if we built at the normal price. So to give you an example, to build our sort of apartments, if you were an independent developer, you would probably spend about $4,000 a square metre. If you're KO, you spend $5,000 to $7,000 per square metre, about $4,000. We build it for $2,500. So that margin, that development margin, makes it economic to own over a long time. So we have to find a way of building cheaper in New Zealand. That's why we're doing this productivity hub and sharing the IP, because we're saying it doesn't have to be this way. We have the most expensive and unaffordable housing in the world. Our build costs are significantly higher than they are in Australia and in the United States. They're not ours. And so, because we're building it, we'll show you how to do it. Hopefully we'll start a house building price revolution. And there's some problems with Carters and Fletchers and so on as well. They've been effectively a cartel operating in New Zealand. Sir?
You paint a very sort of rosy prognosis of the economy in the future, which is great. But question, do you think we're seeing massive inequality now, which has already existed, but it seems to me it's getting worse. More and more unemployment, so 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people lost, state jobs. And the latest I read was that it's predicted to be about 30,000 in total. So, I think it's great to be positive, but how do you reconcile that with...
Absolutely. No, I think you're right, sir. You're right. This journey from here to here, which I think we're going on, is not going to look like that. It's going to look like this. It always has. New Zealand is a lot richer than what... when I talked about my mum and dad and we romanticised about house pricing, New Zealand is miles richer than it was back then. You would much rather live now than then. What I'm saying is I think it'll be a slightly smoother. We are used to having boom busts in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example right now. If I was to develop a building downtown, let's say I was building an office building, what I would do is in the boom times I'd put a little bit of money in and borrow a lot of money from the banks, right? And then you employ all these people and be going well. And then suddenly the economy would go bad. The banks would say, we want our loans back. They would foreclose on you. The building site would shut down. Everyone would lose their job. Boom bust, boom bust. We've seen this, right, in New Zealand. In Australia, this is what happens. It's not the bank that lends the money, it's the pension funds. And so when the market goes down, they've still got money coming in. They say, no, we're not foreclosing on the loan. You just carry on building. So that people stay employed. The building site carries on. The economy goes through smoother cycles. That's why Australia hasn't had a recession, or just one tiny little recession in 28 years. And when it goes down slowly. In New Zealand, we go down a lot. This is happening, so you're absolutely right. We think in the construction industry, because it's something we know something about now. We think 20,000 jobs will be lost this year in the construction industry. It's horrible out there. The number of people who are walking onto our sites looking for work. That should not be, but there's a case in point. Their building sites have shut down because they've run out of money and the banks have foreclosed. We're just carrying on. We're building. In fact, we're building more. So it's going to be, the long-term trend is very positive. History I think will repeat itself with New Zealand, I think, but you're right, it's not going to be, it's not going to be all the way up. Sir?
Back to the bankers.
Yeah.
My understanding with the Commonwealth Bank, for example, it's a group of limited companies. And this group of limited companies, among them, are all the ASB banks in New Zealand. And all of these ASB banks, and a good example would be Hamilton, for example. If they lend money out to say a farmer, and he gets caught up with a drought or a flood, they foreclose on his property, and if they haven't got enough money coming out of what's left in the property, they've got the legal right to scalp the depositors' funds. And coupled with that, any profits they make, they repatriate them to the major bank in Sydney.
Well, I think, sir, I think part of what you're right is true. I mean, it's true that Commonwealth Bank owns 100% of ASB. So ASB is not the Auckland Savings Bank in that sense. It's more like the Adelaide Savings Bank than the Auckland Savings Bank. But it operates here as the ASB, right? So it's 100% owned by them. I don't think that if they're losing money from a loan that they will take money from depositors, but they do make that very generous, that 2% margin, which means if they make a bad loan, well then they'll take some of that profit and make up for it. But of course, in New Zealand, as any of you who are a business owner would know, it's very hard to get funding from a bank because they prefer to lend on houses because that's very low risk lending. So as a general rule, they de-risk themselves in New Zealand, and they tend to do pretty conservative lending for which they make a huge margin, and that's why you will always see me, moaning about the bank, not because I don't think the banks are useful, I think they are. I think they should be allowed to make a profit, but they just make too much money for the risk that they take. That's all. Hi.
Hi. Sorry, David.
Maybe the last question starting to do a closing manoeuvre here.
Two things. One is I'm a member of the community that live here, and we belong to a group called Te Ohu Whananga, or Te Ohu Tamaki, I don't know if you know about them. We're sort of trying, one of their focuses is to get the City Council to do more about housing. And I just wondered if you had an opinion about that or information about that.
Yep.
And also the other question is, that's one thing we do as a community, but what else can a community like ours do for the housing crisis?
Well, you could all switch to simplicity.
Shameless advertising.
Look, I think on the first question, I think it's going to be very hard to get the council to commit a lot more money to building social housing. I would hope they do. I think there is one thing they can do though, which I think is really important, is that, has anyone here built a house? Yeah, you build a house and you get your plans approved by the council, right? Resource consent, the building consent. What happens when the council signs off on that is they have legal liability. So you can sue the council if that house has been built incorrectly. The problem with that is that the councils are therefore very, very nervous and shy about any different way of building and about using any new building materials. So it's all very well the government saying we're going to allow Australian building materials into New Zealand. Yes, but are the councils going to sign off on it? Because they have all the liability, so they get none of the returns but all of the risk. What I think they should do is you should take that risk off the council, and means that if you're a builder you should have to get insurance, building insurance, so that risk moves to the insurers, and then the insurers will say, we approve you to build a house but we don't like the way you build, so you're not going to get insurance. And that means that the same insurers who insure these products in Australia and America, they'll be comfortable using them. So actually, funnily enough, in one sense I think the council should get more involved. More money for housing would be great, but I think they should also get out of the way and allow insurers to insure the risk, and I think it's one of the reasons why houses are so expensive. I'll give you an example. You try getting a house built by an architecture that doesn't specify jib bracing systems, and you try and get a council to sign off on a house that's not built with jib bracing systems. That means Fletcher makes a fortune, right? That means you can't build a house out of it. Well, you can, but it's hard, you know. So it's harder than it needs to be because everyone's taking away risk, So I'm not sure that was the perfect answer for you, but yes, when I see Mayor Brown next time, I'll tell him what you said, get some more money into council housing.